at the age of 80 years old, God reveals himself to Moses on Mount Sinai at the burning bush. In Hebrew, the burning bush is Sinai, which is the same as Sinai. On Mount Sinai, God reveals himself to Moses and says, I have heard the cries of the Jewish people. Go down to Egypt and redeem my people. And Moses begins to have a dialogue with God. Vayomer Moshe el Elikim, Moses speaks to God and says, Mi anochi, who am I? Ki elech, that I shall go to Pharaoh, v'chi oitzi es b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, and can I truly take out the Jewish people from Egypt? Says Rashi, what is the meaning, Mi anochi, who am I? He says, Mi ani choshuv l'daber im hamalachim. Who am I? Am I worthy to speak with kings? And furthermore, v'chi oitzi es b'nei Yisrael v'af im choshuv ani. And if it's true that I am worthy to talk to kings, ma zochu Yisrael. What merit do the Jewish people have? Sheyaseh lehem nes v'yitzieh miMitzrayim. What is their merit that they deserve such a miracle to be taken out of the land of Egypt? And God responds to Moses, the first question first, second question second. Vayomer ki eya imach. Number one is, I will be with you. And I'm going with you, I'll take care of it. You don't worry. I will do the work. Number two, v'zel lecha ois, and this is the sign, ki anochi shalachticha b'yitziacha sa'am miMitzrayim, tavdun es alikim al hahor hazeh. And the sign that you will see, and the merit that the Jewish people have, is that when I take them out of Egypt, they will serve me on this mountain, Sinai, that we are right now corresponding with. Just to read the words of Rashi, inside. Says God, Heshivoi arishon rishon val achrein achrein, shemarta mi anochi, that which you ask me, who am I to go to Pharaoh? It's about me, God says, not about you. I'm going to Pharaoh. Because I will be with you. And then he goes on to say, and that which you ask, what is the merit that the Jewish people have? Dover Godol, it's a big thing. Yeshli Aletzazu, I have a big reason why I'm taking them out. Shaharei Asidim Lekabel Torah, for they in the future will receive the Torah on this exact mountain. L'soif Gimel Chadoshim, at the end of 3 months, Sheyitzu miMitzrayim, after they leave the land of Egypt. Let's analyze this Rashi and understand what is the merit of the Jewish people. And to begin by the following question. Because someone is going to do something in the future, it doesn't mean you get credit for this right now. So the fact that in the future the Jewish people are going to receive the Torah, therefore now they deserve to be taken out of Egypt, you have to put your money where your mouth is. You have to do something now, not something in the future. So why is it that because the Jews in the future are going to receive the Torah, that is enough of a merit for them to leave Egypt right now? Now, we can argue and say, God is Yedei HaSidos, which means God knows the future. He knows that in the future it's going to happen. And because he knows the future, therefore already he can give them the credit for now. Now, this is not a contradiction with the concept of Bechira Chofshis, which means free choice. We say that even though God knows the future, it does not negate our free choice. Knowing something doesn't make it happen. However, in this case, it's very different. It's not about God knowing free choice. God actually says what's going to happen. Once God says it's going to happen, it decrees that into a reality. So if God says they are going to receive the Torah on this mountain, there's no more free choice. So if that is the case, why is that a merit We say because God says they're going to receive the Torah on this mountain, it's a merit for them to leave. They have no choice. God said, He decreed they are going to receive the Torah on this mountain. So if He's decreeing it, it's not their merit anymore. Now, the truth of the matter is, when it comes to Bechira Chavshus, which means free will and determination, or free will and determinism, we say that even though God decrees on the population. He doesn't decree upon the individual. For example, the famous question that's mentioned in the Rambam and many other great Jewish philosophers, and that is, why is Egypt punished for putting the Jewish people through slavery and servitude and bondage when this was decreed by God? God told Abraham in the famous covenant, the Brish Ben HaBesarim, the covenant of the parts, that your children are going to go down into a foreign country and they're going to be slaves there for 400 years, and this is my decree. So not only should Pharaoh not be punished, but Pharaoh should be rewarded. He's doing God's will. He's putting the Jews in bondage. So one of the answers that is given is that God decrees upon a nation, not upon the individual. So each person had a choice whether or not to bring pain and suffering to the Jewish people. It's like lahavdil, or to parallel the Nazis. Each German had the choice to be a Nazi or not. And those who chose to be a Nazi deserve a painful death for all the troubles that they put the Jews through. So, getting back to the original concept, God decreed that the Jews will receive the Torah and Sinai. He does not cause each individual to receive the Torah and Sinai. So there still is this concept of Bechira Chavshus. But we still have one more question. And that is, we are told when the Jews came to the mountain, God lifted the mountain over their heads and said, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, you're all dead. Now that is really a decree. In other words, that's coercion. And if God is coercing the people to receive the Torah, why does God give us credit for accepting the Torah when we had no choice? So how do we understand this idea of God telling Moses, I am taking the Jews out of Egypt based on the credit, on the zechut, that they are going to receive the Torah on Sinai? So the answer is as follows. There's a famous Ran at the end of the tractate of Psachim. It's also other midrashim that say the following. When Moses came and told the Jewish people, God of your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and has told me that we are going to leave Egypt. I am here to take you out of Egypt. And then he said, when he takes you out of Egypt, he's going to give you a gift. He's going to give you the Torah on Sinai. And as the Medrash says, 50 days after you leave Egypt, you are going to get the Torah on Sinai. At that moment, the Jewish people began to have gaguyim. Gaguyim means yearnings and pinings and goosebumps out of excitement that we are going to receive God's Torah. And because they had this excitement, this was not coerced. This was not forced. This is something that they came from within their hearts and their souls, their love and their affinity for God and their excitement. This is the credit that the Jewish people earned at that moment already in Egypt, to be taken out of Egypt. That yearning, that excitement, that hope and that joy that we are going to receive the Torah from God, already this was not coerced. And because of this, they now receive the credit. They received already the reward to be deserving to leave the land of Egypt. There's a medrash that says like this. A king tells a prisoner who's in a dungeon, a dark, deep, cold dungeon, I am going to pull you out of the dungeon. I'm going to free you. And not only that, after you come out, I'm going to clothe you and give you a nice shower and a shave. Not the beard, chas v'shalom, just the hair. And you are going to marry my daughter, the princess. So, number one, already in prison, before he's taken out of the dungeon, he's number one happy at that moment, knowing the good news. And after he leaves the prison, he begins to count the days when I will marry that princess. And the same was true with the Jewish people. Already in Egypt, they were happy and excited to receive the Torah, and after they left Egypt, they began to count on their own day 1, day 2, day 3, up until day 50, when they received the Torah on Sinai. And that is why we have today a mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer, to count the Omer between Passover and Shavuos, because then already in Egypt, the Jewish people began to count to receive the Torah on Sinai. The fact that we make a connection between the Torah and Sinai, the Torah and the liberation of Egypt, means that there's a connection. There's an intrinsic connection between these two concepts. What is the connection between receiving the Torah and being freed from the land of Egypt? We all understand that God's liberation, that God taking us out of Egypt, from bondage to freedom, from slavery to independence, was not only a physical redemption, but it was also a spiritual redemption. In other words, even a person who is good and serving God and fulfilling the Torah and mitzvahs, even that person needs to have a geula, even that person needs a redemption. What is the redemption of a person who is following the Torah and doing mitzvahs? The redemption is that sometimes we do Torah and mitzvahs because it's good for us. It makes sense. These mitzvahs that make sense, I do. The mitzvahs that don't make sense, I don't do. So the entire connection between a man and God, or a woman and God, or a Jew and God, is based on logic. If it works for me, I'll do it. If it doesn't work for me, I won't do it. So therefore, the commitment is a limited commitment. And therefore, we are in a state of spiritual slavery. Slavery to our own desires, to own our own limitations, slavery to our animal soul. And therefore, when God says, I will take you out of Egypt, Egypt etymologically means borders and limitations and constraints. Now we are leaving our own limitations, even spiritual limitations, to be able to go higher and even higher. And therefore, when God says, the merit of the Jewish people leaving Egypt is to serve me on the mountain, it's all about serving God and becoming a total servant, which means surrendering your own will to be God's servant, which we call in Hasidic lexicon the idea of bittul, total self-nullification. Now, this explains a very interesting question, a phenomenon. We just said and established that the Jewish people were very excited about the news that they are receiving the Torah on Sinai. They have these gaguyim, they have these yearning, this pining, these goosebumps, this excitement. We're receiving the Torah on Sinai. If that is the case, what is the reason that when they came to Sinai, and they even declared on day number 5 in the month of Sivan, a day before they received the Torah, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. In other words, we're going to do unconditionally. We accept your Torah unconditionally. And then we will begin to listen, which means we'll begin to study your Torah and understand the reasons behind it. But first we're going to do it. Why is it the next day, on the 6th of Sivan, God takes the mountain and puts it over their heads? I already said yes. I already said I'm going to marry you. Why are you coercing me into marriage? I agreed to it. I agreed to the deal. I love you. I want you. And now you're forcing me? It makes no sense. Why would God put the mountain over our heads after for 49 days we're counting, we're waiting, we're yearning, we're pining, and we even say finally, yes, I love you, yes, dear. I will do everything you want. And after that, he wants even more. He puts the mountain over our heads. Does it make sense? To understand this with another halacha, there's a Jewish law that says that if a person becomes a Jewish slave, an Eved Ivri, the master has a right to give this Jewish slave a Shivcha Kananis, a non-Jewish maidservant, to have children with her, and these children now remain with the master. So after the Jewish slave leaves, the non-Jewish maidservant stays with the children for the master. Now, this law applies only if the Jewish servant was sold into slavery against his will. For example, in a case where he stole money and has no money to pay, so the Beth Din will now force him to be a slave against his will, and now that he's a slave, the master has a right to give him a non-Jewish maidservant. However, let's say a person is in a state of destitute. They're very poor. They have no money. Says the Torah, you have a right to sell yourself as a slave to a Jewish person. And now that you are a slave to a Jewish person, that person, your master will take you into his house. You'll have food. You'll have a nice bed and a pillow. And you'll work for the Jewish master. But in that case, the Jewish master cannot give you a non-Jewish maidservant. What's the difference? The difference is when you sell yourself, you are choosing to be a slave. I decided that I will serve you. There's the I involved. There's the ego involved. I decided to be a servant. I decided to serve you. When there's the I, you don't have the ultimate bittul. You don't have the ultimate self-nullification because it's up to me to decide whether or not I want to do it. However, if you're forced into servitude, that is a complete slave. I no longer exist. There is no I anymore. It's against my will because I have no will. I am totally subservient to my master, and therefore my master can give me a non-Jewish maidservant. And the same is true with the Jewish people. For the first 48 days, the Jewish people said, I desire God. I desire to be God's servant. I am willing to be subservient to his Torah and mitzvahs. There's still the I, and therefore, because there's an I, it lacks the ultimate level of bittul, the ultimate level of being subservient. And God says, good, that was a good introduction, a good preparation, but now I'm going to put the mountain over your heads. You're going to do it because God, I, the big I, the uppercase I, has decided to make you his servant. Not because the lowercase I says, I want to be God's servant. So even though we have this pining, and even though we have this yearning, and even though we have this desire to serve Almighty God, the fact that the I is part of the equation, it limits the servitude. So comes along God and says, that's beautiful, but now I will put the mountain over your head, and you'll truly be my servants. And then this is the introduction to the first of the Ten Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elikecha. I am God, your Lord. I took you out of Egypt so that you shall serve me and not serve Pharaoh. Serve me, a God, and not serve humankind. What is the message from this story? The message from the story is very clear. That the merit of our exodus, the merit that the Jewish people had to leave Egypt and become B'nai Chorin, to become free people, was a merit of what? A yearning and a desire to serve God. In other words, the yearning itself is the merit. The desire itself is the merit. If this is true for the first Exodus, for the first redemption of Am Yisrael from the land of Egypt, it is also true today. In other words, for us to leave this exile with the coming of Mashiach, the merit that we have, why should God take us out of Egypt? Why should God take us out of this exile and bring Mashiach? The answer is because we yearn, we pine, we desire to be connected with God, to marry His daughter, to be reunited with God Himself. And that pining, and that belief, and that trust, that tzipiyah, that yearning and belief that I am going to leave this exile, that I am going to be one with God, that we are going to see Mashiach, that is the merit for us to leave this galus. And that is why it's very important, not only that we do Torah mitzvahs and we do good deeds, because this is part of the promise, this is part of the decree that the day will come that all the Jewish people are going to do God's mitzvahs. That's not a question. However, what is up to us, what is our free choice, is to have that yearning. Our free choice is to have that desire to truly connect with Almighty God. I want to connect this with the story of Moses and the bush. When Moses came to the mountain and he saw the burning bush, and after they had a whole dialogue and discussion for 7 days, by the way, it was going back and forth. God is trying to convince Moses to go down to Egypt. Finally, after Moses agrees, God says, "What is in your hand?" He says, "A staff." Well, take that staff and go down and lead the Jewish people out of Egypt with that staff. To talk for a moment about that staff, that matter. Where did Moses get that staff? There's a famous medrash, and it goes like this. In the book of Ethics of Our Fathers, we read that after God created the whole world for 6 days of creation, at twilight, right before Shabbos, He created the staff of Moses. And that staff was in paradise, and Adam had that staff. That staff, some say, was made out of sapphire. Others say it was made out of the tree of knowledge. And now Adam takes that staff and gives it to his son, who gives it to Noah, who gives it to his son, who gives it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob brings it down to Egypt, gives it to Joseph. When Joseph dies, the Egyptians pillage his house, and they bring everything to the house of Pharaoh. Yisro, who was one of Pharaoh's advisors, sees it, and he grabs it and brings it back with him to Midian. He then puts it in his backyard. And once he puts it into the ground, no one is able to remove that staff. And people come and they're trying to pull it out, and no one is able to pull out the staff. Till Moses shows up, and he walks into the backyard of Yisro, says, "Hey, what a beautiful stick." And it comes right out. And Yisro says, "This is the man who's going to marry my daughter. He is going to redeem the Jewish people." Because on that staff, it had 10 letters, the tzach, adash, be'achav. And nobody had any idea what these letters meant. And these letters already were inscribed in paradise on this staff. because these 10 letters represent the 10 plagues that God is going to bring upon the Egyptian people. And these are the 10 plagues and 10 miracles that were wrought in Egypt and to the Jewish people, and because of that they were redeemed. So already from the beginning of time, God has decreed that the Jewish people are going to leave the land of Egypt. And he has decreed that we are going to leave this galus, this exile, with the coming of Mashiach. So what is up to us to do? What is left for us to do if God is doing all the work? The answer is tzipiyah. Our job is to desire and to yearn and to rejoice over the coming of Mashiach, to be ready at any moment for Mashiach to take us out of galus. So l'chaim, we hope and pray that our yearning and our trust should get stronger and stronger, and very, very soon to see the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.